We're sick of that. We are actually going to fight back against unfair trade practices, whether it's coming from China or Canada.
We'll match Washington's new tariffs dollar for dollar in order to protect Canadian workers, farmers, families, and businesses.
The trade relationship between the United States and Canada has entered a dramatic new phase, with Washington and Ottawa now openly confronting each other over tariffs, trade terms, and the future of their economic partnership. Canada is preparing a fresh response after the United States imposed new tariffs on a range of Canadian products, pushing the two longtime allies deeper into a trade war. The latest escalation follows the collapse of weeks of negotiations between the Trump administration and the Canadian government.
Well, we did make some progress in recent weeks. In the end, that momentum reversed. And we could not accept what the U.S. had offered, nor could we give what they asked. And by standing up for our values and focusing on what we can control, we will build un Québec fort in Canada fort pour tout.
After failing to reach an agreement, Ottawa is now preparing additional measures against American imports, signaling that Canada is ready to fight back rather than accept Washington's latest demands. The new U.S. tariffs have now taken effect, with duties of 50% imposed on selected Canadian goods. The measures cover roughly $20 billion worth of Canadian imports. That figure represents only a fraction of total Canada-U.S. trade. But the products affected include a wide range of goods moving through deeply integrated North American supply chains. The latest tariffs affect around 5.5% of Canadian exports to the United States. But the biggest concern now is that the dispute could spread into much larger and more strategically important sectors. President Donald Trump has already threatened to impose 50% tariffs on Canadian automobiles. That would be a major escalation for an industry where Canadian and American factories are closely connected. Trump has also sharply escalated his rhetoric, arguing that the United States has been treated unfairly by its northern neighbor. He has repeatedly claimed that Canada has benefited at America's expense, and has now declared that Washington does not need Canada as much as Canada needs the United States. The automotive sector could now become the central battleground. Trump has threatened to raise tariffs on Canadian cars, trucks, and auto parts to 50% starting January 1, 2027. That would be a significant increase from the current 25% tariff applied to Canadian autos under the measures currently in place. Steel is another major flashpoint. Canadian steel entering the United States is already facing a 50% duty, adding pressure to an industry that is deeply connected across the border. Canada is now preparing its own retaliation. Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced that Ottawa will respond with tariffs targeting American products. Canada's measures are expected to hit sectors including U.S. steel and dairy. The retaliation is not limited to those industries. Agricultural equipment is also expected to be targeted, increasing pressure on American manufacturers and farmers who depend on the Canadian market. Ottawa has set September 8th as the date for its new retaliatory measures to come into effect. Prime Minister Mark Carney has defended the decision to walk away from negotiations rather than accept what he considers an unacceptable agreement. According to Ottawa, negotiations broke down after Washington introduced demands that Canada considered damaging to major Canadian industries and its broader economic interests. And that brings the dispute to another major political flashpoint. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has rejected Canada's account of the collapse. Vance has accused Ottawa of making unreasonable last-minute demands and argued that Canada was responsible for preventing the two sides from reaching an agreement. Washington maintains that it was prepared to make concessions during the negotiations, but that Canadian demands ultimately prevented a deal.
I frankly thought we had a deal. I think that we should have a deal, but I think that we need to send a message loud and clear to the Prime Minister of Canada. Stop taking advantage of the people of Maine. Stop taking advantage of America.
Behind all of this is an enormous economic relationship. The United States remains by far Canada's biggest trading partner. For Canada, the American market is extraordinarily important because around 70% of its exports go to the United States. That level of dependence makes the current confrontation particularly risky for Canadian businesses, but the relationship is not one-sided. American companies also depend heavily on Canadian goods, energy, raw materials, and industrial inputs, and Canada's provinces are increasingly becoming part of the confrontation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has strongly criticized Trump's latest threat against Canadian automobiles. Ontario is particularly exposed because it is the center of Canada's automotive manufacturing industry. Ford has warned that Canada could use its own economic leverage against the United States, including potentially imposing an electricity surcharge on American states.
If President Trump escalates, Canada needs to be ready to do the same. Everything needs to be on the table. We need to use Canada's many points of leverage to create maximum impact, targeting deep red states and making sure that America's economy feels the pain. And make no mistake, Americans are already feeling the pain because President Trump's tariffs are nothing more than a tax on the American people, raising the cost of everything from homes to food and making life more uncertain for the tens of millions of Americans who depend on trade with Canada to bring home their paycheck. Canada did not start this fight, but we're prepared to win it. Team Canada needs to stand united, stand up to this attack on our economy, use our leverage to protect our workers, and make clear to President Trump that Canada is not for sale.
The dispute has already produced a sharp political response from Trump. After Ford criticized the tariffs, Trump attacked the Ontario Premier publicly and warned that Canada could face even worse consequences if its leaders refuse to cooperate with Washington. Canadian officials have emphasized that Canada is a sovereign country and that its trade and economic policies will be decided by its own government. Trump has also repeatedly referred to Canadian political leaders as governors rather than prime ministers, reinforcing the political tension surrounding the dispute. Prime Minister Mark Carney has rejected any suggestion that Canada should surrender its sovereignty or accept an unequal relationship with Washington. For now, neither Washington nor Ottawa appears ready to back down. The United States has imposed new tariffs. Canada is preparing retaliation. Trump is threatening even higher duties on Canadian automobiles and other strategic industries. And Canadian leaders are increasingly talking about reducing their dependence on the American market. The result is a trade relationship under extraordinary pressure. What began as a dispute over tariffs is now becoming a confrontation over industrial policy, economic sovereignty, and the future of one of the world's most integrated trading relationships. The United States and Canada may remain close neighbors and security partners, but economically, the old relationship is facing its biggest test in years. And as both sides prepare their next moves, the biggest question is whether these tariffs will eventually force a new deal or permanently reshape the way the two countries trade with each other.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.